one of the Sichos from Project with the Sichos, but we're going to start from the middle of the Sicha. So we're going to start from the second column on the first page that we have over there, page 73, and it says over there in the second column, we begin the second line. There's a primary difference between the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. HaMishkan haya binyan aroi. By the way, as way of introduction, especially since we skipped the beginning of the Sicha, in this week's parsha it says that there's the makoim asher yifcher by Hashem, that you will bring the korbanos in the place that Hashem chose, and there's going to be a lot of emphasis in the Sicha about that word, that expression, hamakoim asher yifcher by Hashem, the place that Hashem chose. It's specific to the place. He says, there's a primary difference between the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. HaMishkan haya binyan arai. The Mishkan was a temporary building. Like it says, and I was traveling in the tent and in the Mishkan. And the expression that the Rebbe quoted from a Rambam previous in the beginning of the Sicha, Mishkan Sha'asa Moshe, the Mishkan that Moshe Rabbeinu built, it was a temporary building. It wasn't meant to be a place for the Eibishter to reside in always. As opposed to the Beis HaMikdash, that was an established home, a place where they were supposed to be. Rambam, like the expression of the Rambam is Kivan Nivna Migdash B'Yerushalayim. Since the Beis HaMikdash was once the Beis HaMikdash was built in Yerushalayim, Nesru Kol HaMakoymes Kulam Livnois Behem Payis LaHashem, all places were made prohibited. They were not allowed to build in them a home for Hashem, a carbon, and to offer them a carbon. There's no other home for generations, in other words, forever and ever. Ella b'Yerushalayim Bilvad, only in Yerushalayim or Bahara Meriah and in the Hara Meriah. Before the Beis HaMikdash was built, so first of all, the Mishkan was traveling. It was sometimes in Noiv, sometimes in Givon, sometimes in Shiloi. But even regarding that, there was also a possibility, regardless of that, there was also a possibility to bring private karbonis in what's called the private bamos. But that all stopped completely once the Eibishter settled into his established dwelling place, his established home, which was the Beis HaMikdash. So now the Rebbe explains, this is not just a matter of how the Eibishter lived over there, but it also is a matter of the type of holiness and where that holiness manifested itself was different in the Mishkan versus the Beis HaMikdash. The difference between them in the category of the holiness, in the definition and the paradigm of the holiness. B'mishkan hoisa chalois hakdusha beikar bebinyan v'chalokov. In the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the traveling temporary dwelling of Hashem, the holiness rested primarily on the actual building and its parts that made up the building. Hakroshim, the beams or boards, vayiriyas chulu, and the curtain coverings, etc. They were anointed with the oil of anointment. These were set, meaning that we always used the same kroshim for the Mishkan. We always used the same yiriyas. It wasn't that once you moved and took the Mishkan apart, now you had to have new yiriyos made, the new curtains and ceiling coverings, or new boards and beams set up. No, these were established holy items of the Mishkan. Ubahem loyhoya shum shinui. And in those items of the Mishkan, there was no change. Just in those parts, the actual building part of the Mishkan. Avlo Beis Hamikdash, but concerning the Beis Hamikdash, hoise gam kedushas hamokim. The Beis Hamikdash had something that the Mishkan did not have, and that was that the area, the place, was sanctified. Etzem mekoim hamikdash niskadish. The very location, the geographical area where the Beis Hamikdash was built on, that physical location on the map became sanctified. Ubishnei inyanim, and in two aspects. Top of the next page, page 74. Aleph. In one way was the sanctification was expressed that the physical area and location was sanctified. Da'afke b'negel lebeis hamikdash nemer parshaseinu, specifically concerning and only concerning the Beis Hamikdash to say in our parsha, hamakim asher yivchar Hashem Elokeichem boi, the place, the area, the physical location that Hashem chose it, that the physical place became sanctified by Hashem's choosing it. And Beis, another aspect was, there was actually a process of making the actual location, not just the building, but the location holy. There was an actual sanctification of the area, the floor of the Mikdash, which was not so by the Mishkan. In the Mishkan, it was only the beams and the sockets and the curtains that were the tent over the Mishkan. Those became, and there were actions done to sanctify it. Also concerning the Mishkan, it says in the pasuk, when it speaks about the Soita woman that needs to drink the special mixture of the Soita waters, and it says that part of the ingredients that were added to these waters was from the dust that will be in the floor of the Mishkan, the Kohen will take. So we see from this expression of pasuk, bekarka ha-Mishkan, from the earth, from the sand that will be in the floor of the Mishkan. So we see there is an area that's designated as the floor of the Mishkan. So how are we differentiating between the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash? The Beis Hamikdash, even the floor and the location and the geographical place was sanctified. Whereas the Mishkan, it's only the edifice, only the building, but not the floor. The floor was sanctified because you could, for the Soita woman, you could only take from the sand or earth that was on the bottom of the Mishkan. So he says, Harei, Aleph Hoyazarak Araya Lefisha. First of all, that was only temporary. In other words, for as long as the Mishkan was in that location. But once the Mishkan moved to a different location, to a different area in the Midbar, so you couldn't take the sand from the previous location, because now that sand in that previous location lost its sanctity, because initially any type of sanctity was only in a temporary way. Beis, another point that Rebbe says, afilu b'Sichos, even at that time, when the Kohen was instructed to take the sand from the floor of the Mishkan, it wasn't a result of the sanctity of the very geographical location and the ground on its own. The sanctity that was imparted to this earth and dust and sand that was used was only something caused by an external force, because there was an actual edifice of the Mishkan on top of it, so that brought sanctity to the area. But as soon as you remove that, the sanctity was gone. And therefore, the Rebbe is going to say a very practical thing that we know about the sanctity of the floor of the Beis Hamikdash versus the sanctity of the Mishkan. Last paragraph on the first column. For this reason, there's a difference between the location where the Mishkan was wherever it was located, whether in a desert or in Shiloh or in Noiv, etc., to the place where the Mikdash was. Sheba Mishkan, when we're talking about the Mishkan, after they took the Mishkan apart. And they moved on to the next location. No holiness remained in the initial place. Top of the second column, similar to the removal of the sanctity and the holiness of Har Sinai once Matan Torah was over. There was no more sanctity. We knew there was a whole idea that before Matan Torah and during Matan Torah, the Yidden weren't allowed to get close to the mountain. But once Matan Torah was over, so it says, when the shofar was blown, signifying that the all clear sign, hey, Mayalu Bahar, they can go up on the mountain. There was absolutely no more sanctity left to the mountain. In a similar vein, in a similar way, when the Mishkan left the location, whatever location it was, in the Midbar, it didn't have any sanctity left in the area and the location that was there initially. Masha'enkim a Beis HaMikdash, as opposed to the Beis HaMikdash, Hadin hu kipsak din HaRambam, the halach is like the Rambam rules, Shemakrivim HaKarbonis Kulam, Afal Pi She'ein Shom Bayis Boni. Theoretically, if we knew the exact place where to put the Mizbeach, but there's no building, there is no edifice of a Beis HaMikdash, just we would erect a Mizbeach on the correct location, so then you could offer all and any karbonos over there. Private karbonos, communal karbonos, and even those type of karbonos, there's different levels of karbonos. Some karbonos are kachim kalim, a lighter type of holiness, and they can be eaten outside of the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. But the holy of holy karbonos, karban chatas, karban noshin, whatever it was, these were only allowed to be eaten in the courtyard in the Azara. So the Rambam says, even if there's no enclosure whatsoever, even if the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed and not surrounded by any type of enclosure, one, again, theoretically, if we knew exactly where the location of the Mizbeach is, which is part of the problem why we cannot offer now, and there's an issue of tumah and impurity. But again, theoretically, as far as location is concerned, the sanctity of the Beis HaMikdash is there, and the sanctity expresses itself in being able to offer karbonis on its location and to be able to consume the karbonis that must be consumed within the precincts of the Beis HaMikdash. How come? Why is this different than the Mishkan that had no sanctity once it left? Because the very location and area itself was sanctified because of the Shechina itself. That's why we have in this week's parsha, it says, the place, not the home that Hashem, not the building that Hashem will choose, the location that Hashem will choose. The choice of Hashem is in the location. And that's why, since Hashem chose that place, the sanctity is set over there forever. It's always in that place, regardless if the building is standing or the building is destroyed. So now, the Rebbe is going to explain the issue that he initially spoke about in the beginning of the Sicha, the part that we skipped. The Rambam that the Rebbe brings down at the beginning of the Sicha speaks about how the Beis HaMikdash was not on a flat ground, but it went up in levels. There was different sections, and each section of the Beis HaMikdash was a higher level than the previous level. And also the Rambam points out, not like the Mishkan was. and we'll talk about because the Mishkan was totally flat, and we'll talk about this issue now. Ois Dalet, Al Pisa moving atam, according to this understood the reason. Shadin zeh, that this halacha shamigdash she'kulei loy hay b'misha, that the entire Beis Hamikdash was not in a flat location. Elo b'mayla ahar, it was in an upper incline of the mountain of Har HaMoriah. The Har HaBayis, the Temple Mount, is called a mountain. There was an elevation going up and up. Uprote hachilukim ba'aliyos mimakim lamakim shebeis hamikdash, and the specific differences in the different levels of ascent from one level in the Beis Hamikdash to another level of the Beis Hamikdash. And again, in the beginning of the Sicha, he quotes the Rambam that he goes all the way till from the eastern gate until the area called the Chel. And from the Chel, he goes up to the Ezras Nashim, 12 steps. And then the whole Ezras Nashim is flat, and then he goes up from the Ezras Nashim to Ezras Yisrael. That's the beginning of the Azara, the courtyard, 15 steps up. And then the whole Ezras Yisrael is flat, and he goes from that a step up high an Amma, and there you go up to the Ulam, which is the inner building by 12, that's the inner hall. You go up another 12 steps. The Rambam speaks about all these levels. Why? This is a unique and novel thing that was only in the Mikdash. This was not in the Mishkan. And Dafke Mikdash, specifically in the Beis HaMikdash, that it's connected specifically with the location. The location, the area, the place is the place that Hashem chose. Therefore, Yitochen Loimar, it makes sense. Shechiluke hakdusha shebemigdash yotzim chilukim b'makom hamigdash. That the very different sanctities associated with the different areas of the Beis Hamikdash, as we know, different things could take place only in certain areas. The karbonos can only be brought in certain areas. Obviously, one area was holier than the other, etc., etc. There was areas only Kohanim could go over there. All these different differentiations in holiness of the general area impacted and was also expressed itself in the location and the ground of the Mikdash. Begoiva hashetach, the height of the very area, nivdol makom echad mimishnehu, with which one area in the Mikdash was different than another area in the Mikdash. Ki kedushas hamakim shu beis hamikdash einay rak kedusha klalis asher chala b'shava beis hamikdash kuloi, because the sanctity of the location of the area of the physical geography of the Beis Hamikdash is not just a general holiness that's equally holy throughout the entire Beis Hamikdash. There are different levels, the sanctity of the place. Appropriate to and corresponding to the different levels of holiness of the parts of the Beis Hamikdash. Heichal has its holiness. Hazara has its holiness, and every single holy area had different types of holiness. So those different types of holiness was something that impacted and expressed itself also in the physical area, the makom of the Beis Hamikdash. And not only that, these differences also remained once the Beis Hamikdash wasn't around. It's not just that once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the entire location of the Beis Hamikdash, the physical geography, was equally holy. No. Going back to what we quoted before from the Rambam, V'gam hakdusha yuchedes shal hamakim haprati kvu la'olam. also the unique holiness of the individual area, specific locations in the Beis Hamikdash are also set forever, that there are different levels of holiness. Like the Rambam said, quote, Afal Pisha Ein Shom Bayis Banui, even though the building is not built, there's no built-up building. How do we see this? Like it's also understood from the quoted Rambam that we mentioned earlier. We are allowed to eat those karbonis that are in the class of Holy of Holies. That the location where they had to be eaten was only in the area called the Azara, the courtyard. B'chol ha'azara, it can be eaten in the entire Azara, even though the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. But it cannot be eaten outside of the Azara, even though it's a location that is associated with the Beis Hamikdash, because we see there are different levels in the area and location, even if there's no physical edifice on top of the geographical location and ground. This is all the Beis Hamikdash. Mash'enken HaMishkan, as opposed to the Mishkan, was not in such a way that it was set in one place, that it was established in one place. About the Mishkan, we don't say that, it's the place that Hashem chose. The sanctity of the Mishkan had to do with the different components that made the tent of meeting. Hakrashim, Vayiriyas, the beams and the curtains on top. Therefore, Hachiluk, Sheben Kedushas Chelkei HaMishkan, the differences between the sanctity of the different components of the Mishkan, Loi Nimshach Loi Nikva V'chal Al HaMokim B'Midbar, that was not drawn down and was not established in and did not reside upon the location in the desert. That over there was a temporary place of the encampment of the Mishkan. For this reason, the location of the Mishkan was flat in the entirety, from the outer place to the most inner place. In the area of the Mishkan itself, there were no differences between the place or one portion of the Mishkan to another. Top of the second column. Therefore, the Rambam emphasizes this difference between the Mishkan and the Mikdash. Earlier in the Sicha, the Rebbe pointed out that this is something that is distinct and different from the Mishkan. That the Mishkan was something that was flat. Not that way, the Rambam says, was the way the Beis Hamikdash was. That the Beis Hamikdash was in an incline going up a mountain. But is that the only difference that the Rambam could find between the Mishkan and the Mikdash? There were many other differences. But the Rambam doesn't point that out. The Rambam doesn't emphasize that. You'll learn about the Mishkan. You'll see that the Mishkan is not like the Beis Hamikdash. It's what does it matter in a Sefer of Halachos, like the Rebbe asked at the beginning of the Sicha, to know that this is different than the Mishkan? Because by saying and pointing out this difference, you see a totally new idea about what the Mikdash was that the Mishkan never even had. It informs you what the Mikdash was about. The very fact that the entire Mikdash was not in a flat area, but it was an incline on the mountain, the different elevations in the different sections of the Mikdash, this expresses a novel thing that the Beis Hamikdash had distinct than the Mishkan. since the Beis Hamikdash, as opposed to the Mishkan, was the place that Hashem chose, so the Beis Hamikdash and its portions affected its location, that sanctity of the place, and therefore the sanctity of the place translated into a physical difference as well about the different elevations, each elevation indicating a higher level of sanctity. So now the Rebbe is going to ask, if we remember from learning the Hilchos Beis HaBchira, and we remember from Masechtas Midas, again, I'm not sure if Rabbi Bukit got to this year or not, there was one area that was the most holiest part in the Beis HaMikdash, and it doesn't say it was any higher. The Kodesh HaKadoshim was no higher than the area preceding it. If we're saying that the holier the place is, the physical location will express that by being on a higher grade, a higher level, why then was the Kodesh HaKadoshim not something on a higher level? Let's see in Oisei. The Rebbe asked this question. According to this, we need to understand, according to what we mentioned before, the different ascents in the area of the place correspond to the different levels and ascents in the holiness of the place. The greater the holiness of one particular portion and part of the Mikdash was higher, so its area, its place, its location was higher. Why were there no steps? And it should be many steps to go up to the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies was distinct and different in its sanctity from all parts of the Beis HaMikdash. Kishmoi, like it was called. Kodesh legabe HaKadosh. What does it mean, Holy of Holies? Even in comparison to holies, to the rest of the Beis HaMikdash, it was holy. Like the Rambam explains in the following chapter after talking about the different elevations in the different areas of the Beis HaMikdash. The highest level of sanctity, is in the room of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Only the Kohen Gadol can enter there, and only on a special date, Yom Kippur. And even on Yom Kippur itself, he only is allowed to enter over there during the Avodah. So if it's so sanctified that it's totally no human being ordinarily is allowed to enter, only in a very exceptional type of circumstance. Stop at the next page, Rim Cain. Based on the principle that we just now established, that the holier the place was, the higher was its location, so then the Kodesh HaKadoshim should have been so much more higher than everywhere else. So the Rebbe says, like in many things, that the Rebbe says that a question in Nigla can only be explained with the assistance of Chassidus. The matter will be understood by first prefacing the explanation in the previously explained difference between the Mishkan and the Mikdash in the language of Chassidus. By understanding this whole principle that we spoke about before, that the Mishkan did not permeate the ground that it stood on, whereas the Beis HaMikdash brought holiness and sanctity to the very ground it stood on. Let's see this in the expression of Chassidus, and then it will help us understand why the Kodesh HaKadoshim did not have any steps at all to lead up to it. HaMishkan shahayadiras aray kiviyach lakadosh baruch hu. The Mishkan, that metaphorically speaking was a temporary home for Hashem. Hayasui me'etzim, was made out of wood, kroshim, the beams, the boards, which is part of tzemeach. It's the plant kingdom. It's from the growing things, vegetation. Umiyariyos, and it was made also from the curtains that were placed on top. ha'asuyos bechelkon min minachai, that part of those yeriyos are made from the animal kingdom. V'rak hakarka she'ala hukam hamishkan lefi shah ha'isadoimim offer. Only the ground, the earth, that upon it was established and set up the Mishkan temporarily, was inanimate, which was made from the earth. The Rebbe actually in the footnote mentions that he's quoting this from Torah Oir, but really in other places it mentions that the sockets which the beams, boards of the Mishkan were inserted into, they were made from an inanimate item. They were made from silver. But be that as it may, so we see this type of level that it was primarily made from the higher forms of creation. Masha'en came based on Mikdash, as opposed to the base of Mikdash. Shahaya diras kavash al Kodesh Baruch Hu, it was the set home of Hashem. Hayabonu beikir ma'avonim was primarily built from stones. That was its primary makeup. Stones being the lowest part of creation. It's from the type of doimim, inanimate things, inorganic things. Ve'ein boinim boy eitz boilet klal, and like the Rambam specifically says you're not allowed to have any protruding wood whatsoever. Either you could make the Beis HaMikdash out of stone, or you can make it out of brick, which is daimim, the inanimate. That's lower than the vegetation and the animal kingdom. So we need to have an understanding of that. The established home for Hashem is made from the lowest type of part of creation. The temporary dwelling of Hashem, which is the Mishkan, has in it vegetation, has in it things from the world of the animal. So the Rebbe goes on to explain Vatam B'Zemavur, and the explanation about this is explained in other the reason for this is explained in other places. The primary purpose of the Mishkan was not so much to affect an established and set and permanent change in the physicality of the world. Rather, it was meant to mirror the chain order descent of the worlds. All the spiritual world still comes down here. Therefore, the building of the Mishkan was corresponded to the manner how things come in Seder Ishtalshlus. In other words, when the chain order descent of the worlds work, the highest comes first, the highest on top, the lower level follows that underneath it, and the lower levels underneath that. So therefore, Michse HaMishkan, the covering of the Mishkan, which was Lamaila, it was over the Mishkan, Hayim Min Chai, it was made from living beings, from animal hides. So too, the goat curtains that were below that, and the majority of the curtains that were beneath all of that, there was a few layers, they were all made from the animal kingdom. Lamatam is lower than that. Miuta di'iriyas HaMishkan, there was a few of the curtains of the Mishkan that were made from other material, not from actual animal hides. And v'chelka Mishkan atachtoinim, and the lower parts of the Mishkan, which is Karshei Mishkan, the boards and beams of the Mishkan, hayu min atzemeach, was from the vegetation. U'lemataf mizeh, even lower than this, ha'adonim, the sockets, top of the second column, v'karka Mishkan, and the floor of the Mishkan, hayu mikesef va'afer min ha'doimim. They were from silver, they were from sand, earth, from the inanimate category. Not so the Beis HaMikdash. Hayisren v'achidush of Beis HaMikdash b'yachas l'Mishkan. The advantage and novelty of the Beis HaMikdash comparable in regards to the Mishkan, who bekach shal yodei nishlemes hakavona, through the Beis Hamikdash is fulfilled the purpose and intention nisava kodesh baruch hu liyas loydira betachtoinim, that Hashem desired to have a home in the below. He wants his home in the lowest. It's not about a descent in an orderly fashion. He searches out the lowest to make his home there. Davke, specifically below. This means that holiness, the resting of the Shechina, will be drawn down into the world and will permeate it. Until the lowest level in the physicality of the world. The inanimate things, its life and its spirituality is not seen visibly. An animal, you see that's a living thing. Even a plant, vegetation, you see it growing, you see some spirituality to it. Inanimate things, rocks, etc., minerals, etc., silver, earth, you don't see any life to it. You don't see any spirituality. And that is where Hashem wants to manifest himself. That's where he wants holiness to permeate. Since the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash is to draw down the resting of the Shechina in the world, in such a manner that the holiness will permeate within the physicality and will elevate it. Therefore, this expressed itself also in the physical object and items of the world itself. By the fact that the actual location and place of the Beis Hamikdash was on a mountain. A mountain indicates that it's higher than the areas around it, indicating because we're elevating this place. The more elevated and the higher the levels of holiness in the Mikdash were more elevated, so the physical place was also higher physically because the holiness permeated the location. As opposed to the Mishkan, the purpose of the Mishkan was not that the resting of the Shechina that was in the Mishkan should permeate the physicality of the world till it reaches the inanimate, ha'aretz, the earth. There's nothing lower than the earth in these four categories of Daim, Tzmeach, Chaim, and Daber. The resting of the Shechina in the Mishkan and its holiness, it's as if it remained as a separate entity. They were not visible and they did not express itself in the physical place. Therefore, though in the Mishkan there were differences in the levels of holiness, still in all, still in all, when you're talking about the physical location, even though there were different holy areas in the Mishkan, but that was the building. The area, the physical geographical location was kulay b'mishor. That was entirely in a straight area. It was not an incline, no differentiation between one place and another. Not raised up in according to and corresponding to the levels of holiness. The Mishkan was flat and on the same level, even with the location of the desert. He didn't even say, you know what, the Mishkan is a holy place. The desert is desert. And then according to Chassidus and Kabbalah, desert indicates klippus and even klippus shalchat meis. You didn't raise up the Mishkan from the desert because it wasn't about permeating the lowest. Since it wasn't about permeating the lowest, the Mishkan can sit on the desert floor as well. Al Pisa, move on. Now, getting back to the question we asked, but why wasn't the Kodesh HaKadoshim higher? Pisa moving gamatam shekoy shekadoshim sheba migdash hamakam hamukodesh beyoser loy haya nivdol begoyve mehechla migdash. According to this, will be understood also the reason that the Holy of Holies is the Migdash, the most holiest place, was not distinct in its height from the other section of the Migdash, the section immediately preceding it, the Heichal, where the Menorah was, and where the Shulchan was, and where the Golden Mizbeach was, etc. Why not? This idea that the holiness and spirituality of the Beis HaMikdash affected and influenced also the ascents of the physical location. For this reason, one place was higher than the other, corresponding to the differences in their holiness. Nitran la'amroi, this is applicable legabe madreges elu b'kedusha shebehen hadarga tachtoine be'erech l'alyoina. For those levels in holiness, that the lower level is comparable to the higher level. There is some type of similarity, except this is lower and this is higher, but they're both holy and it's a progression. Hanailos hamenu rak b'shtemes rebailus k'yoytuvzeh. It's higher, but in a measurable fashion. It's higher in a limited fashion. It's higher by 12 steps higher. But when we're speaking about a level of holiness that's incomparably higher than what preceded it, it's beyond higher and lower. Since it's a level that's so unbelievably and incomparably elevated, you cannot limit it and you can't define it by the numbers of steps, because as soon as you start giving a number, that's begoiva modudu mugbal, that's already a measured and limited height that will make a distinction between the Kodesh Kadoshim and the rest. And therefore it will be a distinction in the height of a physical place. So therefore, since the distinction is and the difference between them is so far apart, you cannot even divide the place anymore, because any division would be incorrect, because it would indicate that there is some type of relationship to the previous level. That's the difference between the rest of the portions of the Mikdash, between the Holy of Holies, in the portions of the Beis HaMikdash. One part is higher than the other. The differences between, let's say, the Heichal and the Azara, and the Yisrael and the Noshim, etc., etc., and the Noshim and the Chel, all of these, it has some type of distinct and identifiable type of level. Every part has some type of comparison to the level of holiness that's close to it, that it's coming from. And corresponding to the different value between them in her holiness, there's a difference between them in the number and the height of the steps between one area and another area in the Mikdash, to such a degree that one was higher than the one next to it, also physically. But in the sanctity and holiness of the Holy of Holies, that is totally incomparable to the other parts of the Mikdash. The entire definition, the entire paradigm of saying higher and lower doesn't even apply by the Kodesh Kadoshim. Top of the second column, Over there was in the physical location, Geulah Shalatzmusi is Musi is Baruch Shu Nimna Nimnois. There's a revelation of Hashem's very essence that the impossible is not impossible for him. In the place of the Aron that it wasn't measured. In other words, the fact that many times we've had this in different Sichos, the location of the Aron could not be measured. The Aron has a certain measurement, and then if you measured from wall to wall, you saw that the Aron did not take up any space. But physically, the Aron was there. So this was a place that was beyond place. So since it was a place beyond place, that was a place that only Atzmus could be in, Hashem's very essence, so such a place is not just somewhat higher than the place preceding it. It is so beyond anything else that you cannot give it limits of steps. Such an ascent cannot express itself even as a hint or a similarity in a height of a physical place, that that type of height would indicate that it's measured and has a limitation. Then there's another point that Rebbe says. Another idea behind this is the Rebbe is going to analyze an expression that the Rambam uses when speaking about the different ascents that a person goes through, the different levels in the Beis HaMikdash. Rambam, by prefacing an analysis of the language of the Rambam. The Rambam says, quote, when a person, emphasis on the word person enters from the eastern gate of the Temple Mount, mehalech, he goes at soif hachel b'shavet till the end of the chel section in a flat ground, va'oila, and he rises up min hachel la'ez hanoshim, from the chel to the women's courtyard, b'shtemas milos, by 12 steps, chulu, u'mahalach kol ez hanoshim b'shavet va'oila chulu, and he travels and he walks the entire women's courtyard, again a flat plain, and then he goes up. What does this mean? The Rambam is connecting it with a person going from level to level. The Rambam is not talking in a bubble of the Mikdash itself. The Beis HaMikdash had these different levels, level 1, level 2, and between level 1 and level 2, there were so many steps. No. He is connecting it with a person traveling, walking through the Beis HaMikdash. Hainu shadvar misyachsim. The matters are associated not so much with the height of the place itself. He's not talking, again, just about the different levels in the Beis HaMikdash. The Rambam is referring to the person that's walking and going up. What's the idea behind it? We could say, with this, the Rambam hints. When a person is traveling and going from level to level, in all these different levels in holiness, the matter has to be in such a way that he goes up. The person is not just going to a physically holier place, the person himself is going up to a higher level. It's incumbent upon him to rise up, to spiritually elevate himself from level to level. When can such a demand be made on the person by all the other levels of the Beis HaMikdash? It's possible for a person to correspondingly and commensurate with the different levels of the Beis HaMikdash to be expected to rise up accordingly. But what's under discussion is the level of the Holy of Holies. It's not in such a way that a person goes and rises up. He's going and rising up in his ascent in holiness. He finds himself in a complete state of nullification and sublimation. That means it's all equal. He's entirely bottle. He's completely nullified. There is no even levels of a sense further. It's completely nullified. The last page that ever says, "V'dvarim elu shayachim gam lebeis hamikdash hanimtza v'shechanti besoichem." These ideas are also to be found in the Beis Hamikdash, that is found within each and every Yid. This also has to do with the level of the Holy of Holies that's found within the personal Beis Hamikdash. That's in every single Yid. Pnimius, the Pnimius Halev, the Holy of Holies is the innermost part of the heart. Bechinas Yechidah Shebenefesh, the level of the soul, that's the level of Yechidah. Sheba ein shum tzir v'agbola. In the Yechidah, there is no form, there is no boundary, there is no limitation. Val achas kam v'kama she'ein ba shum ispashtus. The level of Yechidah, there is no expansion in it. This is hinted by the point on top of the Yud. The letters Yud Kei Vav Kei correspond to Chaya, Neshama, Ruach, and Nefesh. But the point on top of the Yud, which occupies no space, no expansion whatsoever, that's the Yechidah. And from the perspective of Yechidah, Kol Yehudi Mevatl Mesalek Es Atzmo Yivritzoyni Lebot Leil Vizbarach. Every single Yid nullifies and removes himself and his will to be nullified to the Eibishter. Ubitzehu etzem iskashrusay, and this is the essence of his bond. Shalamayla megader beyond any type of paradigm and form. Yechidah liyachtoch, my Yechidah, completely joined with you. Bedugmas knisses Kohen Gadol, similar to the entry of the Kohen Gadol. Kishliach kolamchi Yisrael b'chomakim shehem, who was a representative of your entire nation Yisrael, wherever they were located. That's what the Kohen Gadol was when he entered Achas b'shana l'kodesh hakadoshim, once a year to the Holy of Holies.